All right, good day, everyone. Can you hear me all?
Yes, I can.
Yes, good day. Welcome to today's FinTech program. Please kindly permit me to share my screen. I'm coming. Okay. So today we are in the fourth quarter 2023, first week of the JIIPCC Mentorship and Internship program. This is the first class for the FinTech program, and we'll be talking, our topic for today will be the legal developments of FinTech. That will be our topic for today. Sorry that the meeting, the link itself wasn't opened earlier on as supposed. The 10 minutes time that we gave to the opening, we just finished a class right now. So I would just like to take a few announcements before the class officially starts. So our first announcement, we want to just give a brief about the JIIPCC Mentorship and Internship Program. So about the program, the JIIPCC Mentorship and Internship Program for FinTech is a quarterly mentorship program for students and young professionals across Africa. Mentees are afforded the opportunities to access valuable advice, training, network, mentorship, internship, discussion forums, industry updates, and resource materials from experienced mentors. The program seeks to encourage continuous training, development, and evolution in Nigeria, Africa, and around the world. Hashtag JIIPCC Mentorship Internship Program. You can watch our videos by searching for JIIPCC on YouTube and Facebook. Those are where classes are recorded. You can go back to YouTube after the class in case of any information that you may have missed right while you were on class. So the objectives for the program itself, it's to provide easy access, guidance, training, and resource materials for students and young professionals in Africa, to facilitate dialogues and networks amongst experienced and less experienced practitioners and stakeholders, to transform mentees into mentors and leaders for the next generation, to facilitate further mentorship, internship, scholarship, and job placements for mentees. So those are our objectives for the program, the reason why we do what we do. Our other announcements for today is that the mentorship program is still on the registration, is still ongoing. We are still taking in students up to the second week of the quarter, and you can still register. You can still register if you have a friend or a family member who wants to register for the program. They can still do that. Okay, we'll be going straight into today's program. So we have our first mentor here. I'll just be giving a brief of our mentor's profile. Our first mentor here is Mr. Lucien Xavier Pierce. Mr. Lucien Xavier Pierce has 22 years of post-qualification experience After serving articles, Lucien spent 2 years in London, where he was second to telecoms and IT law firms Bed and telecom multinational cable rather and wireless. Lucien deals with contentious and non-contentious aspects of commercial law and focuses on the regulatory aspects of telecommunications, media, technology, and fintech. Lucien advises local and international clients on telecom, licensing, data privacy, media and IP law. Mr. Lucien's educational background is University of KwaZulu-Natal. He has a BCom in LLB. He also went through the University of Strasbourg. He has a LLB in IT and telecommunication, Oxford University said School of Business, FinTech program, and lastly, World Intellectual Property Organization Advanced Certificates Intellectual Property. So we want to we will have Mr. Lucien give us we will have him share some of his ideas and thoughts in the legal development of fintech. But before he does that, we'll go to our second mentor. We'll be giving a brief of our second mentor, his profile. Our second mentor for today is Mr. Folarinwa Aluko. Mr. Folarinwa Aluko is a legal practitioner and partner in the firm of the Turam Rockwood solicitors, where he provides advisory and consultancy services to companies and a wide range of creators, users, and startups. Folarin is a director of the Intellectual Property Institute, Nigeria. He is the chairman board of trustees of the Intellectual Property Lawyers Association of Nigeria. Folarin is a member board of trustee of the Sports Lawyer Association of Nigeria, as well as a member of the board of Nigerian Digital Chamber of Commerce. Mr. Aluko is also a board member of the Songwriters Association of Nigeria with a background in ICT hardware and digital forensic. Folarin has a legal terms to champion consequential strategies, impact public interest, litigations in the IP space since 2012. Folarin is a consulting mediator with commercial intermediates and ADR firms based in Lagos and Abuja. He is a thought leader in Nigerian innovation space. Okay. In the Nigerian innovation space, technology, intellectual property, and entertainment space. Okay. So with that is the profiles for our today's mentors. So I can see, if I'm not mistaken, I can see Mr. Lucien Pears on the call. So before we have our other mentor come up, we would like Mr. Lucien to give us his 20 minutes introduction into the legal development of fintech. Sir, can you hear us? Mr. Lucien, are you with us, sir?
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir, we can hear you.
It's quite funny, you know, as a technology lawyer, I still get tripped up every now and again by my hardware, but I'm glad everyone can hear and see me. I was saying it's such a pleasure. Thank you for that introduction. It's such a pleasure to be back on the program to take part in such an important initiative. So I'm very, very pleased to be back. I'd like to extend my greetings to my colleagues, Ms. Imam And to my old friend, Mr. Luko, it's great. I hope we will have an opportunity to interact during the course of the afternoon. So yes, thank you again for having me back. Perhaps a little bit about myself, and I think just to motivate anyone else who is out there and who is finding it perhaps challenging, whether it be in a commercial sphere or whether it be trying to get into the legal sphere. I had quite a rough landing in the profession. I studied at university. It took me quite a while to get training and to get a formal job. And when I did get a formal job, it was with an organization that did not pay very much money. But the approach I took was that I would use it as an opportunity to learn, to get a foot into the profession, and to essentially grow from there. So for anybody who is struggling at the moment, who is finding it difficult and challenging to enter the commercial space, to get a job, to get into training with law, please check out my LinkedIn profile. There's an article or a few articles that I've written there that hopefully will motivate you as you begin your journey in the profession. So that's just a bit of motivation at the start and a little bit about myself. As the introduction said, I've been practicing law for quite a few years, and I transitioned. One other aspect you should consider is during the course of your career, it's not going to be a very linear and straight journey. It's going to be quite a winding road. The example I give is when I did get into my first job, I practiced what we call human rights law. Many of you will know what that is. And I represented many indigent people, many poor people who could not afford legal services. I assisted them with that. And then interestingly, I then took a break, and it was then that I found my very passionate interest in technology law, dealing with IT, cybersecurity, privacy, and FinTech as well. So if you find yourself in a job or in a position that you're not really enjoying, please be assured that with determination and perseverance, you will get into that role that you will eventually enjoy and prosper in. So with that out of the way, perhaps given that our topic this afternoon is related to the legal aspects of FinTech, and I took a look at Hope's presentation earlier, and I must say it was very thorough. I don't know if I'm supposed to reveal that, but it was very good. What I did want to perhaps touch on is a few other aspects that I think are critical to FinTech as well, to any FinTech business. So whether you're starting out with the FinTech business or whether in fact you are already involved in a FinTech business, some of the other aspects that I have found that are critical and quite important to the success of a FinTech business include an in-depth look at the regulatory aspects that apply to your business. And I'll explain the importance of that. The second aspect is contractual aspects, which are dealt with already, but I want to touch on a few others, which I think are quite critical when you are involved in that type of business. And then the last one is an area which has really exploded in recent months. In fact, I shouldn't even say recent months, since the beginning of the year. I'm sure all of you have had an overload of information related to artificial intelligence. And I perhaps will touch on that, but from a different perspective as well. So what are the important aspects that you should consider from a regulatory point of view? Now, something that trips up many good businesses in the jurisdiction where I am, which is in South Africa, and I'm sure it is quite the same across the continent, is a failure to do a proper due diligence exercise to determine what regulations affect your business. Because there's nothing worse than starting up a business or getting involved in a business and having this wonderful idea and investing your time and perhaps money, whether you've lent it or loaned it from a bank or some other institution, or whether your family have actually poured money into it and lent you the money. And you get this business going, and then you find out down the line that you haven't applied for appropriate licenses and you have to be shut down, or you get immense fines. So for me, one of the most important aspects is to look at your business and whether you have the funds to get lawyers on board, or whether you talk to somebody who has a bit of legal training. It is critical that you get good insight into what regulations govern your business. For example, are you required to have some sort of license? In our jurisdiction, some businesses have started up as FinTechs, financial technology. And the reality is that if they are taking deposits, quite often they would require a banking license. And if you don't have that license and our regulators find out about it here in South Africa, they will shut you down. The other one is something that is quite common across Africa is remittances or money transfer type fintechs, where for example, whether you are in South Africa or Kenya or Nigeria, and you might be working there and have family elsewhere, you would send money through one or other of the money transfer businesses. One of the best known, I suppose, is MoneyGram. But there are many that are starting up. And the issue there is you need to ask yourself whether you need a license for that as well. Now, in South Africa, we have a requirement that anyone who's taking money from somebody and sending it, whether across the country or across the continent, needs what we would call an ADLA license. So in your country as well, look at whether there are regulations that apply. And I could go on about the different types of regulations, but I'll stop on those two examples. The other additional contractual aspects which I would like to add, and which I'm sure Hope will deal with a little later, relate to third parties. Now, when you're setting up a business, quite often you might have a service provider for your business. So take my law firm. We are lawyers and we are not IT people. So we have outsourced, basically signed a contract with somebody else, and we say to them, you come in and you look after our computers, you look after our servers, you look after all our cloud information, and they do that. Now, what you need to consider from a legal perspective is if you're getting third parties to come and help out and work in your business, what happens if they make a big mistake? Now, and that big mistake perhaps affects your business and affects some of your customers. In that situation, your customers are not going to say, no, it's okay, Hope or Dennis or Semilore. It's not your problem. It is actually, it's fine because somebody else caused it. No, your customers are going to say to you, I don't care that the IT person made a mistake, Lucian. It is you who must now pay me out for all the damages that I've suffered. So from that, what I advise is look at trying to get some sort of indemnity in the agreements that you sign with your service providers. Now, an indemnity is a promise from that service provider that if something goes wrong, they will give you some sort of protection. And that protection might be covering any costs that you have to pay your customers, or if you are sued, covering the costs of lawyers. So here's an example that happened in South Africa. One of our well-known banks called Nedbank, it basically had an arrangement with a marketing company. And it took every single one of its customers' cell phone numbers, and it gave it to the marketing company. And they said, whenever we have a marketing, something that we want to market, you, this third-party marketing company, will be in charge of sending out those text messages. But what then happened was that marketing company had a hackers got in, and they stole the information of the bank's customers, and that caused a whole lot of problems. Now, even though it was that third party's fault, the marketing company, the bank had to deal with the issue. The last aspect that I would like to expand on, and I'm sure it will be dealt with in a bit more detail, is IT or AI governance, artificial intelligence or IT governance. Now, remember, a fintech business, because as we see from its name, FinTech, which means financial technology, it's probably going to be based on and rely on a whole lot of technology. Now, in that instance, whether you are a big business or whether you are a small business, you're going to have some sort of IT hardware and IT software. Now, how you run that IT software and how you look after that IT hardware is very important to the success of your business. The types of decisions that you take and how you protect that technology, that is what we would call IT governance, how you govern and look after and take decisions about your equipment. Now, it's been shown that companies, whether they be big or small, and not just companies, but organizations, if they have appropriate and good IT governance processes in place, they are typically more successful than their competitors who do not have proper IT governance processes in place. So here's an example. For a small shop on the corner, perhaps near your house, their IT governance would probably entail making sure that their laptop, that they keep information about the business, is locked away safely at night, that it has antivirus on it, and that they only allow 1 or 2 people to access it. As simple as that sounds, that is IT governance. They are taking proper decisions and they have proper processes about how they look after their IT. Big organizations would have far more complex IT governance processes, and they would put in place policies and what we call frameworks. And you might not have heard of it, but different types of IT frameworks. We can talk about things like COBIT. We can talk about other frameworks like ITIL. These are all IT governance frameworks that big organizations use to look after their business. Now, what has been shown is that if you have these frameworks in place, or if you have a simple one like the one I mentioned at the start, your business is more likely to succeed than your competitors who don't have that. Now, there are many other IT governance frameworks. In South Africa, we have one that is very popular. It is called King 4, which is more about corporate governance, but it has a chapter, if I can call it that deals with IT governance. And it looks at the ethical use of IT. And what is the ethical, how does that affect us? Well, if you now look at AI, artificial intelligence, you will see that that is becoming a very important aspect of AI governance, because it's been shown that if AI is not set up properly, there are problems that can arise. The Dutch authority, the revenue service, I'm sure in your country, you've also got the revenue service. In South Africa, we have the South African Revenue Service, which is tasked with collecting taxes. Now, in the Netherlands, what the Dutch authority did there was they got this fancy piece of software, artificial intelligence software, that was able to try and identify people who were committing fraud. The problem that came up, and they were subjected to lots of litigation afterwards by people who were really damaged by this software, was that this software had what we call a bias. When it was programmed, it somehow was against people who had darker skins. It was against people of North African descent. So it kept identifying wrongly people as fraudsters when in fact they were not. And that created big problems for the Dutch Revenue Service. So that relates to bias and ethical artificial intelligence. So for a big organization, when they're procuring artificial intelligence type software, it's critical for them to look at that in much detail and make sure and get promises from those who've produced that artificial intelligence software that it is going to work properly and it's not going to have all these flaws that we've just discussed. So that's just a very high level overview of the legal and regulatory aspects that I think would affect FinTech businesses. And on that note, I'd like to hand back to our facilitator. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Pierce. Thank you for that section. We're able to, I'm sure the mentees were able to get a thing or two about the legal development of FinTech and some of the general aspects of it. So I think I can see Mr., if I'm not mistaken, Mr. Folarin. Mr. Folarin is on the call. Please, sir, it's your time. Sir, can you just brief us into or give us a brief introduction into the legal developments of FinTech, sir?
Hello, good afternoon.
Thank
Good
you,
afternoon.
sir.
Yes, thank you very much. My apologies for joining me. Try to explain doing some actually looking up to see what happened to the session. I feel that, I guess that's some good luck. In terms of the legal uh, the legal aspects of what is referred to as legal movements in fintech. I'm on the legal aspects of fintech in Nigeria, so about the legal and regulatory aspects. I think we've been one common thread that one will find in any conversation about the fintech space in Nigeria, especially with regards to regulation, is that it is still developing. And I think at the moment, essentially,
Sorry, sir, we can't really hear you anymore. Your network, there's a glitch in your network, sir.
okay, how's it now? Is it better?
Yes, sir, it's better now.
Okay, I was saying that a common talking point when it comes to uh, legal and regulatory framework for fintech in Nigeria is that we often hear that the space is developing, and I think that it's really anything that has developed. I think it's actually very developmental stage. So you find a lot of regulatory overlap. There are certain areas where regulatory agencies kind of overlap with each other. You know, what is the difference
Um, Hello, sir. Sorry again. It still seems there's still a little issue with your network, sir.
there's what's the
It's like your voice is breaking somehow. So,
okay, that's
but I think we can hear you more clearly.
okay. I'm connected to the Bluetooth device, so what I'm trying to say is that there's a general consensus. Fintech regulatory space is still developing. What we tend to find in terms of the legal and regulatory framework, or in terms of legal and regulatory development, we found that many agencies, like the central bank, the financial services sector, you have the Securities and Exchange Commission, you have, and even recently, or more recently, the Federal Consumer Complaints and Competition Commission, jumping into the fray to sort of create administrative or regulatory frameworks, that different players in the fintech space, can or that to provide some sort of consistency. I think quality control, but you find that so there's a bit of regulatory competition. So there's some competition among the regulators. Are we together? Can you hear me? Is it clearer now?
Yes, sir. You are clear, sir.
Okay, so there's a lot of competition among regulators. And I think in Nigeria, and I think one of the reasons why this is so is because the philosophy, the overarching philosophy for regulation at the moment in Nigeria really centers around revenue generation. What does that mean? It means that our regulatory agencies are all jostling to position themselves as agencies that can generate revenue for for government, essentially. And so what we find is that regulation in Nigeria really centers around the granting of licenses, the sale of licenses, and the issuance of penalties. And then, of course, sale of forms and things like that, without much attention being paid to to things like quality of service, to creating some sort of standardized body of knowledge within the industry, and then also to providing awareness to the consuming public. So in a nutshell, the space is still developing. And I think it is really the interplay of the competition between our various regulatory bodies, like Central Bank of Nigeria, the NFIU, and then bodies like the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, the Federal Consumer Protection, Competition and Consumer Protection Commission, and bodies like that. Everything now falls down to the interplay between these bodies and how these bodies sort of whether they can work together, or whoever is able to laud or to generate the most attention. I think that's what it comes to. So I see a situation where we find that even though there's a lot, and what this regulatory conflict leads to a lot of double taxation. It leads to a lot of double taxation. So you see situations where some of these fintech companies are exposed to several levels of taxation. In Lagos State, for example, the Lagos State Inland Revenue Service, which has jurisdiction over personal income tax. You find the LRS going after many of these fintech companies that have an office in Lagos. And so there's a lot of double taxation. But what we find is many fintech companies tend to adopt a very compliant approach to regulatory oversight, wherever the regulatory oversight is from, even in spite of the multiple layers of regulatory oversight and the multiple layers of taxation. We find that they tend to somewhat to roll over. And I see a situation where at some point in time, maybe in the coming year, there's likely to be a situation where there might be some pushback. So we might start to see some public interest lawsuits, that may now start to develop, to help to develop this regulatory framework. Because in a situation in Nigeria, what tends to happen when you have a high volume of regulatory interference or activity, what happens is that the regulators tend to overshoot the jurisdiction, and then there's a lot of administrative overreach. But at the moment, there's that, conflict between the regulators. And I think the fact that the financial services sector is still growing in spite of all this conflict shows that there's a huge potential, and there's a huge potential for the growth of this sector in Nigeria. It also shows, I think, that there's a very huge market that is underserved by the existing financial services industry. And so I look forward to hearing some of the presentations that will be made today and how these presentations will address, some of these developing challenges, because it's a developing area in Nigeria. I think there's a general consensus, and even globally, general consensus about that. So these are some of my thoughts in relation to the legal development in Nigeria. Particularly when you talk fintech services, there are, of course, the range of possible services that would require the connection or conjunction of finance and technology is almost limitless. But in Nigeria, the popular services tend to center around, loan applications, pretty much banking services, providing access to finance, savings, investments, essentially like tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 level banking services, because we're still struggling with who is responsible for what, and you have a situation where, as I had referenced earlier, the various regulatory agencies are all jostling for control. What tends to happen is you find that the easiest way, so in the past, maybe about 3-4 years ago, a FinTech, a technology services company would partner with a bank and then leverage off of the bank's license, the bank's commercial banking license, to provide access to certain specialized financial tech or FinTech services. But what then started to happen was the Central Bank of Nigeria would then start to levy sanctions on the banks. And so you had a situation where the technology services companies would now apply for banking licenses, particularly maybe under the microfinance banking, as microfinance banks, obtain a microfinance banking license and then use that license to trade. But what you then have is a situation where a tech company now becomes a finance company, and I think you'd also have, and what the big banks now started to do was that the big banks in Nigeria, because they already have banking license, a lot of them started trying to either buy over or acquire FinTech companies, or to also provide services at the level or to the same market that these FinTech companies are targeting. So I think it's still a developing space. There's a lot that will still happen in the next 18 to 24 months in terms of how the players in the field interact with the various levels of multiple regulation and multiple taxation. But I think there's definitely a lot of hope for the sector, even though I think there was a slowdown in financial growth, in access to funding. I think as a result of the various global financial crises. But there's definitely a market, and I think the market will determine the flow of value in Nigeria. So there's a huge future for this sector. And I think with that, I guess I'm looking forward to at least having a few more conversations along these lines in the course of today's session.
All right, thank you very much, sir. Thank you, Mr. Folarin. I want to see our mentees respond to Mr. Lucien and Mr. Folarin's section. I want to see thank you messages on the chat box. Please, can we just do that? We'll be going ahead shortly to the presentations of the mentees. We will be there's only one group on FinTech currently, so we'll be taking their presentation. So mentees, our group presenter, please, can you go ahead and share your screen and have your presentation?
Good afternoon, everyone. Please, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you very much. Thank you once again for the opportunity.
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Lucien. Thank you, Mr. Lupo. It was nice hearing from you. My group and I were tasked to present on the legal framework of FinTech. Before I go on, I would like to say the saying change is a constant is very true. However, we need to understand that change is a constant is one out of progression. As we progress and as we advance in life, there's a need for change. And that change most times comes in form of advancement of life and living. When it comes to technology, The recent technology advancement we experienced has all come as a result of finding a solution to services. As I would like to say, the essence of technology has been one of the hearts of providing solutions to problems faced, either in small spaces or on the international scale. Financial technology comes as a result of, as I said earlier, providing a solution to issues faced by people. Most of the time, these issues might not be issues that affect physical well-being. However, they could come in the form of limitations to services. In relation to financial technology, or better known as FinTech, we're seeing this as the annex between finance and an advancement to meet the current needs facing humans, as I said. Financial technology helps and aids providing services, financial services to both businesses, consumers. It allows financial services to be easily consumed at the ease of whoever needs it. Recently, that has come in serious ways. We've seen Paystack, we've seen Flutterwave. All these companies have all built infrastructure that seem as a bridge to one hand closing a gap and on the other hand finding a solution for an issue. I'll go on to the talent needed by fintech companies. Fintech companies is a hybrid bridge between finance and technology. If there was to be a Venn diagram drawn, there will be finance that has issues that has services in relation to accounting, financial risk analysis, and technology that involves cybersecurity, data protection. Then, as I said earlier, if there was also a Venn diagram drawn, at the center, we'll have people like legal compliance, protection of privacy, protection of intangible assets. Just like a car needs an engine, the heart of fintech companies might be the heart. However, the body can function with just the heart. It needs hands, it needs legs, it needs the head, and it needs feet to properly achieve this. Currently, as in Nigeria, there might not be any singular regulation that seeks to serve as an umbrella head to provide for fintech companies. However, just like Section 2 of the Constitution, which might not directly be able to be proved as a right, we still, such as the Ogoni cases where people are referred to the African Union. So in Nigeria, we have examples such as the National Data Protection, we have CBN Operation Guidelines, and we also have the CBN Guidelines on operating electronics in Nigeria. One way or the other, this comes in place to serve as protection. It just gives a form of orderliness to how fintech companies operate, whether it's in relation to their regulations, also things as like an operation to how things operate. I'll go ahead to talk about the talent needed by fintech companies. The need for financial experts. Already on its own, finance itself requires experts. These experts, they monitor the system, they analyze complex issues, they provide risk analysis, because aside from providing the solutions to issues, the financial aspect of this needs to retain its core. So that way, we need financial experts to come in and provide risk assessment as to how this is going to operate. Also, programming and data analysis. Data in this current era has to be one of the most important intangible assets. Probably like in the last decade or so, we've seen intangible assets probably not given enough spotlight as it's given now. But we understand that the fact that a man isn't bound in chains physically doesn't mean he cannot be bound in chains intangibly. This way, programming and data analysis, they bring data together, they make use of IT systems to aid the proper functioning of these fintech services. There's no essence of providing a service that has loopholes and that doesn't allow the essence of this operation to come in fully. Cybersecurity comes to serve as, if there was a police to how the internet operates, that's what cybersecurity will operate as. They come to protect and they come to safeguard against fintech business risks or issues that might not seem to the consumers, they might not be a serious issue. However, to the employers and to fintech companies, cybersecurity analysts, they come to ensure the proper protection of data for the consumers. Then there's marketing and sales. For marketing and sales, marketing already is defined to be one of the psychology of selling. So it is how people sell things. It's how people sell services. It is how people sell products to meet their target audience. Sorry. It helps people sell services and products to meet their target audience. In order for these fintech companies to gain, it's one thing to offer services. It's another thing for you to offer services that are not properly consumed by those who you think all you want to be communicated to. Marketing and sales operate in a way that it will drag those possible users of these services to see this product and be able to interact with the product. Then there's legal compliance. Legal and compliance. The need of legal professionals in every sector can never be downplayed. It's much more than offering a service. It's making sure that your company operates in line with the regulations already in line. It also allows you to be careful not to go above or to make mistakes that might seem flawed, but actually there are rules that needs to be gone through. It says the ignorance of the law is not an excuse. You cannot say you do not know and make an error. You need legal analysts to help you go through contract agreements and make sure that you're not doing anything that crosses the line. The next section is on what fintech companies should consider when hiring talent. It's much more than hiring talent. As I said earlier, the heart of fintech could be providing services. But how do we employ the hands and the heads to meet the heart of fintech? So, employment contract. Employment contract needs to be properly looked into to make sure, for example, as Mr. Wilson spoke about, he spoke about employing and sourcing third parties. In this employment contract, if it's properly written, that during the course of this, you are not supposed to make use of our products for another company. Sorry. All of this safeguards and make sure that people don't go overboard. We also make sure that personal data isn't leaked and the company secrets are also not shared with the public. Intellectual property and NDA agreements. NDA agreements are not disclosure agreements. Basically, as I said, intangible assets and intangible rights. Regarding intangible property is one of the hallmarks of the current generation. We all have non-physical assets that they might seem all physical assets that have value, and then this is to be protected. Then tax compliance. That's what applies for fintech companies. This way, there's regulation of the tax that comes in and how they contribute to the revenue. For instance, Mr. Aluko spoke about the LIS being on personal income tax and that being going overboard. In situations like this, fintech companies already have to speak with their legal analysts are aware of where they stand and the kind of tax that they should pay. One of the advantages of fintech companies is the cross-border transactions that they can make. Recently, not recently, but there was a cheaper cash and paystack collaboration. This allows for payment of transactions outside of Nigeria. Also, there's something called the African Continental Free Trade Area. Nigeria is a party to this African Continental Free Trade Area, and one of the essence of the African Free Trade Area is to allow for seamless transactions. As I said, though there might be limitations in relation to there not being a singular authority for fintech companies. However, Nigeria being a body to this allows for operations to exist. Now, to the hallmark of this presentation, which is the future of fintech. The future of fintech is going to be the future of fintech right now is can only be on advancement because of in the little space that we have witnessed, we have seen how much these services have come through for us. One way or the other, we've all had to interact with one of these, if not more than one. Now, the truth is there cannot be any limitations to the future of fintech, especially in relation to progress and an advancement. However, in a world where there is harmony between regulations, we're going to see fintech companies sojourn and blossom in ways that we never have expected. It will be great because the issue now could be if there are not regulations that allow for this, these loopholes could become an opportunity for unscrupulous individuals to take advantage of these loopholes. And in a world where the regulation doesn't promote fintech companies, it means that we will not be able to have as much access, or it could be instead of we have access within national access, but there will be international limitations to what fintech could do. what FinTech could do for its consumers and for companies as well. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you very much, our presenter, for that wonderful presentation. We'll be having our, okay, before that, I would like to just see our mentees down the call, just react to that presentation. She did a job well done. I want to see some reactions, telling, showing your appreciation for that presentation. Okay, can we have our mentors comment on the presentation, please? If our mentors are still available, what's some of the observations from their presentations, what you would like them to take note of, SARS? The floor is yours. We would like to go with Mr. Lucien first, so that he can give his own contribution and observation.
Thanks very much, Dennis. I was hoping my colleague, Mr. Folarin, would go first, but yes, certainly I am willing to comment on the presentation. So I've been through it, and I heard what was certainly a very thorough presentation. Excuse me, and you know, the most critical aspects of any FinTech related business were covered. You know, I enjoyed the fact that you dealt with the HR, human resources, and the intellectual property aspects as well. The reason I raise that is because quite often what we find is that in the early days of setting up a FinTech type company or organization, there's a very loose and flexible arrangement with regard to who does what. Everybody does their bit. The programmers come in, the developers come in, the strategists come in, and you get going, and the organization gets off the ground. The problem is that in the very early days, nobody has documented who has done what and who belongs, or what belongs to the company, or what belongs to third parties. So consider the situation where you've built this wonderful FinTech and it uses its own custom-made software that you got a developer, perhaps a third-party developer, to develop for you. And here you are, it's off the ground, and you're about to perhaps sell it to another much bigger organization that wants to take control of it. And you think, oh, I'm going to get rich very quickly. The difficulty that you're then faced with is that you haven't secured ownership of this intellectual property of the software itself. And there's always that possibility that down the line, that programmer could come back and say, but that is my software, and you need to pay me license fees. So that's why, for me, that connection between human resources and intellectual property is quite critical, because what you would find in a properly run organization with good governance is that all employees, all third parties, all contractors would have agreements in place, and those agreements would deal with aspects like intellectual property, as I mentioned, and that way you get to reduce your risk. The other aspect that you dealt with, and not just because I'm a lawyer, but simply because this is one of the areas that creates huge problems for organizations, is you went into good detail about the legal and compliance aspects that affect a FinTech. Now, again, this again crosses over with what I said earlier about HR and IP and securing those rights by way of agreements. If there are appropriate agreements in place, your risk is reduced. When disputes arise, the agreements are very clearly able to articulate what the people, the various parties who might be parties to that agreement, agreed. So there's no dispute. There's a clear record about that. The compliance aspect, of course, is critical, because as we've seen, if you look at Google currently, it is paying huge record-breaking fines because of failures to comply, as some regulators have found and alleged that Google has failed to comply with certain requirements. So compliance, again, having somebody on top of that is critical. FinTech businesses often deal with transfers of funds And as we know, there are a plethora of laws that deal with issues such as money laundering, terrorism, finance, etc. So most fintech businesses that are engaged in transfers of funds and remittances are probably going to need to comply with, and most countries have them, what we call know your client laws, which is basically vetting your client to make sure that you know who they are and that they are legitimate. They are not on one or other of the various lists that are out there, whether it be terrorism, finance, etc. So again, compliance is critical because you don't want to be an organization that gets a fine for not having complied with those sorts of regulations. The next one that was quite interesting for me, and it's tied into the fact that you mentioned the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, is cloud computing. Now, what is critical for us and what is quite important and being debated in South Africa at the moment is this concept of data sovereignty. In other words, data belonging to the country in which it was created. Now, as we know, with the African Continental Free Trade Agreement coming into place, there's going to be a huge amount of data that is created across the continent. Africa, as we know, also has the youngest average population. So we are going to have this gold mine of data that is possibly going to be in the cloud. The question, again, that we would need to ask and that a fintech would need to keep its eyes on is, where is this data being hosted? Are there are there laws in place within the country that address data sovereignty and where all of this information should be hosted? If you keep your eye on the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, there are various aspects of it that deal with data, that deal with cybersecurity, privacy, and many aspects that will affect fintech businesses. So I was quite impressed with the fact that the presentation dealt with and addressed some of these really cutting edge aspects. So well done to you. I certainly think that from a legal perspective, if you were running a fintech company, you'd certainly have dealt with and addressed many of the more pressing issues that would affect your organization. So well done to the team on that presentation. I was most impressed. Over to Mr. Folarin.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Pierce. We will have Mr. Folarin make his comments on the presentation. Mr. Folarin, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much, Lucius, for that very encompassing, for that very rounded intervention. I should commend the group for, excuse me, for putting together a very interesting presentation. Considering all the challenges that the industry faces. In terms of, and I agree with Lucian with regards to, all his recommendations and all his observations. I think there's part of the presentation that caught my attention, and it has to do with this. In Nigeria, we tend to have this fixation with, or this assumption that there has to be a singular regulatory framework that addresses or deals with any industry or all the issues in any particular quote unquote. For example, during the presentation, I think somebody said something about the fact that there is no singular framework, no single framework regulating the operation of financial technology companies or fintech companies. I don't think that's I'm not sure if it's a positive or a negative, in the sense that I don't expect that there should be a singular operational entity, considering that the range of fintech services is very wide, very wide one. I wouldn't expect that there would be that we should have, a one-size-fits-all rule or one-size-fits-all agency. And I think that's part of the conversation that we'll be having in Nigeria. And it is, how do we get our government or regulators to refrain from to have to get the legislature actually to stop creating one-size-fits-all rules for different sectors. What that tends to do is it actually tends to stifle innovation, and it tends to restrict or infringe on the ability of what's it called? It hampers the ability of individuals within the sector, players within the sector, to actually serve the purchasing public effectively. So number one, this idea that we should have a singular regulatory framework may not necessarily be ideal for us as a country. May not be ideal for us as a country. So that's number one. Number two, I think the other thing I would like to highlight is centered around Lucien addressed it perfectly. This idea of, the growing concerns around data protection and data sovereignty. Data sovereignty first, and then on a more, localized level, data protection. I think in Nigeria, one of the biggest challenges that we have as a country is that we have privacy laws. So there's the right to privacy is a recognized fundamental right, a constitutional right. However, we find that the biggest infringer on the right to privacy, individuals' right to privacy, actually is government in Nigeria. So we see situations where individuals, excuse me, our private information, especially when you look at banking records, for example. Our banking records is easily accessed almost on a whim, by regulatory agencies. So you find a situation where, let's say, the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, or even the Nigerian police, without a warrant or without an order of court, just request for certain information from the service providers, from the bank X, and the bank provides the information, without any thought as to the implication or the impact on the data, on the privacy rights of the subject. And I think this pattern is a very common one. About 2 years ago, there was a lot of hue and, well, not much hue and cry, but we heard about the fact that some
Mr.
there were
Okay.
cards with information belonging to Nigerian website. We're trying to sell it online on the dark web. And that, of course, raises huge concern because INEC registration information, as voting information, actually is very, very personal, and it's enough to locate individuals down to their places of origin and so on and so forth. So we find situations where there is not so much attention being paid to the compliance by federal government agencies with basic privacy requirements. And I'm raising that because the Federal Competition and Consumer Control Commission, Consumer Protection rather Commission, began to intervened or started to make a foray into, or became a regulator, if you may, became a regulator in the FinTech space, simply because, or as a result of concerns around the misuse of data taken by borrowers. So they call borrowers or people who are subscribed to these digital money lending companies, digital money lenders. And so you find a situation where now, as we speak, and I think I think it's a bit of a misnomer because the Consumer Protection Commission should actually is supposed to act as an ombudsman dealing with cases or dealing with infractions on a case-by-case basis. But what we find now is that, for example, Google will not upload or will not put any app on its Play Store unless that app, the promoters of the app or the developers have actually obtained a quote unquote a license or an approval from the Consumer Protection Council, which is I think, in my opinion, is illegal, even though the object, the end is a just one, but the means by which that end is being achieved is wrong, and it does create a lot of potential for regulatory overreach. So that's another point I'd like to highlight. And I think finally, the third point I'd like to highlight centers around, and it touches on HR and compliance. And I like the fact that the presenter actually made a deliberate reference to HR. One of the biggest problems that fintech companies in Nigeria have today is that they do not pay the proper attention that should be paid to hiring lawyers or hiring compliance professionals. And why do I say this? I have noticed, I think over the past 24 months in particular, most recently, that whenever you find hiring positions in many fintech companies, many Nigerian fintech companies, you would rarely ever find the position for legal or compliance check, unless that company is applying for a license or is applying to be licensed by the Securities and Exchange Commission, which insists or requires each company that is licensed to have a designated compliance officer for compliance and anti-money laundering issues, terrorist financing and AML, CFT, CPF, and so on and so forth issues. But in terms of HR, the primary focus of most HR departments in many fintechs really is centered around user experience, marketing, customer service, and tech development. In fact, particularly tech development and then maybe user experience. So to the detriment of legal and compliance issues. And I think that is a trend that we should see start to turn, because I think there's a general habit from my experience dealing with tech companies in Nigeria. Many tech companies seem to dislike, or there seems to be this love-hate relationship between legal services firms or legal firms, or firms that provide legal services, and tech companies. So I think there should be a very deliberate effort, or there should be more attention drawn to the need for tech companies to actually hire in-house compliance experts. Of course, there's always the opportunity or the possibility of outsourcing legal, but there should be somebody in-house who is responsible for providing that core and very necessary compliance function. And so in conclusion, I would say fantastic presentation. You covered a lot of ground in a very short amount of time, and I would say well done. Well done, well done. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Folarin. Thank you for that wonderful contribution. We again want to celebrate our mentors that are on call, Mr. Lucien Pierce and Mr. Folarin Aluko. Okay.
I think your mic is muted.
Okay, it's not actually. Sorry, can you guys hear me? Can everyone hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, I was saying, we want to thank our mentors, Mr. Folarin and Mr. Lucien Pierce, for their inputs on the mentees presentation. Okay, we'll be going on to the next session for this class, and that is the question and answer session. I know over the course of, though it may seemingly look like a brief introduction, there may be questions that may have arisen from the mentees, on the side of the mentees, and we want to give them the opportunity to share their questions so that our mentors can see if they can shed light on those questions. So I would like to see our mentors who have questions raise their hands and share in the chat box. So please, if you have a question, you can raise your hand or share it in the chat box. Okay, are there questions from the mentees? Does anyone have a question for this section? I'm sure even while conducting your research, working on the presentation, writing the article on the topic, there must have been something you must have encountered that you need clarification on. This is your opportunity to get that clarification. Can you go ahead and ask your question? Okay, I can see Hope. Your hands are raised. You can unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hey, good afternoon, sir. Good afternoon, Mr. Folarinwang. Good afternoon, Mr. Lucien. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much to the speakers for giving us such an enlightening session. I'm really grateful. Hope everyone can hear me.
Yes, we can. Loud and clear.
Okay. My question is, do you think fintech companies are indirectly moving towards taking over traditional financial industries, e.g., like the banking sectors? Because recently now, according to what I've noticed, people, like on a general level, people are gradually moving, they are gradually making use of fintech softwares like microfinance bank, like OPay, PalmPay, Kuda, because literally these softwares, they give us less headaches and they also charge less. So people are like moving to use these apps more than using normal banks. So do you think that in the next few years, fintech companies will be the new constant and not just a trend?
Okay, thank you for that question, Hope. I would like to direct the question firstly to Mr. Folarinwa.
Okay. Fantastic question. But my answer to that question would be to say that I don't think it's not a question for what will happen in the future. I think it's more of a question as to what is happening now. I think the trend actually is that many more users are gravitating towards financial technologies. Well, let's call them fintech companies or non-customary. They're all financial. They're designated as financial institutions, but non-banking financial institutions, which we mean. And I think this trend has become widespread. It's a cultural phenomenon, I think. For example, whenever I have the opportunity to take a boat, or use any ride-hailing service, in conversations with the drivers, I find that, for example, almost every, bar none, or maybe with one or two exceptions, practically every boat rider uses one particular fintech company. I won't mention their name, but it starts with O. They use one particular fintech company. And every time I ask, why do you use the services of this company? The answer is simple. They say, the answer I get is immediately a transfer is made, I get the notification, right away, almost immediately. And so what we find is that in order to provide some sort of unique selling point of market differentiation, fintech companies have, a lot of them are doing a lot of work. They're putting in more work in the tech end, and what that does is it prioritizes the customer experience. So things like confirmation, or transaction confirmation, then fidelity of the transaction. So the probability that you would not have repeat debits, for example, or repeat transactions when you're trying to do one single transaction. So there's the process is much more is more secure. Well, let's not say more secure, but the process is actually less cumbersome. So the user experience is a better one. And I think many of the banks many of the traditional banks have woken up to this reality. And we find that in the fallout of the Naira redesign policy, many people gravitated towards using almost exclusively these fintech service companies. And I try to keep abreast of the various services they offer. So I'm actually registered. I'm registered, or I have quite a number of them, over a dozen of them. I try to use those that I can from time to time to monitor, development in terms of their service offerings and how they try to differentiate themselves within the market. So I would say that it is not really a question of what would happen in the future. I think now, because of convenience, and also because it's like the fintech service providers, the fintech companies they actually listen to customers, and almost all the banks, seem to have lost that the customer is always right philosophy. They don't seem to adhere to it so much. So I'll give an example. There's this recurring issue of multiple bank charges that are made arbitrarily and wantonly, if you may. So you receive notifications for charges that you didn't subscribe to. It's a very bad practice. And I should say on this platform that the Central Bank of Nigeria has dropped the ball, on its regulatory activities in this area. So you find banks subjecting customers to some ridiculous charges and ridiculous and in some cases unwarranted charges. Essentially theft, stealing from customers. But you now find a situation where in order to achieve some solutions, most fintech companies, especially the ones that provide savings and loan services, most of them don't charge transactional fees, but they have limits or caps. So some will say your first 3 transactions for the day are free, or won't charge you for the first 3 transactions, or will not charge you for the first X number of transactions per month, and so on and so forth. So you find that in order to get the attention of the end user, these companies are actually willing to go the extra mile. And of course, these are things that make them more attractive to the public. It also helps to grow public confidence. I think one sector where we're yet to see, this potential actually snowball is in the area of foreign exchange conversion and foreign exchange transactions. You find many of the forex apps that we have today. A lot of people like Payday, for example, and Payday. I think there are a couple of Payday and the rest and co. In recent times, there have been many complaints about Payday. I think I read something that seemed to suggest that there might even be a scandal brewing. But the idea is that access to foreign exchange is a major problem generally in Nigeria. And so if fintech companies in this space are actually able to provide some sort of, or are able to distinguish themselves by listening to the customer and providing services that the customer really needs, what you tend to have is a situation where there will be a high rate of migration towards these fintech companies. Now, I'm talking about the Forex guy. There will be a higher rate of migration to these services, and away from the traditional banking or even the traditional black market vendors. So I don't think it's a conversation about what will happen in the future. I think already as we speak, people are voting with their wallets, and the market is already telling traditional financial institutions that there's something the fintech guys are doing that you guys are not doing, either you're not doing enough of, they are not doing at all? That's my take. Very fantastic question.
All right, thank you, sir. Thank you, sir, for that answer. We'll be taking the next question. I can see Jessica Okike's hand raised. Please, you can go ahead and ask your question.
Okay, good afternoon, sir. Thank you for the wonderful session. It was really amazing and enlightening. Okay, so my question is to you, Mr. Folarin. Considering the fact that the Nigerian government is used to interfering in citizens' data, what can be done to curb it? What can be done to reduce it, especially when they don't have a warrant for that?
Oh, fantastic question. So I think there are at least there are a number of levels or things to unpack in your question. And I think let's take an example. So talking about the misuse or abuse of subject data by agencies by government agencies. You could take any example from the policeman on the road who looks at a young boy or a young girl walking on the street and says, yeah, Yahoo, Yahoo. He takes the person's phone, opens the phone and starts to search through or read through that person's private correspondence and whatever. So from that scenario on the one extreme to at the other extreme, a situation where a government agency would call a financial institution and request for private information, whether it's banking information or whatever information about a citizen or a Nigerian without cause, So you have those two extremes, and it happens on a daily basis. The Inspector General of Police has made several public service announcements to the effect that police officers should stop searching people's phones because those searches are illegal without a warrant. Warrants are provided for under the Administration of Criminal Justice Act and the AC and the laws of the various states. Every search must be by warrant. But the problem now is, and so we have a situation where the entity that seems to be making a lot of noise, so that's the government now, the federal government particularly, about respect for privacy and the data of Nigerians, is actually the biggest violator. So there's that disconnect. And so the question is that there are two levels to the question or to the answer. The first answer would be there has to be more awareness among the public. So the using public, the buying public, the Nigerian public, we need more awareness as to what our rights are and how we can protect ourselves from overreach. So that's number one. And then number two, on the second side, I think there has to be more judicial oversight applied. And I am a little wary to call for judicial oversight because I know that the judiciary at the moment, it has its own challenges. So you're dealing with, imagine taking a matter before a judge who may not be familiar with, let's say it's a transaction that may involve Bitcoin or crypto, or some other form of new technology. The judge may not necessarily be familiar with the concept or not particularly familiar with how the technology works. That does create its own set of challenges. But I think there has to be, in a situation where we have increased regulatory activity, especially where that activity now becomes competitive, there definitely has to be a lot of judicial oversight. Because what the regulator tends to do is it is in the nature of the regulator to overreach, to extend the boundaries or the scope of their regulatory power. So the regulator now starts to might turn themselves into judge, jury, and executioner. And so the regulator would make a law, usually not through Congress or not through the legislature, but they will make subsidiary legislation. Then they will interpret that subsidiary legislation and then now execute it negatively, either against the citizen or against a vendor or a service provider. And that would not work well for anybody. It doesn't bode well. So I would say in terms of what should be done, I think we should have a situation where more users and more service providers actually run to the court for reprieve. I think we have that. Something similar happened in the GSM or the mobile communications sector, where you had a situation where this issue of citing of masts, for example, there was I think about 3 or 4 agencies who were all jostling for control over the ability to regulate where licensing of masts, communications masts. And so you had, for example, the Ministry of Environment, you had the NESRIA, that's the Nigerian Environmental Regulatory Agency. You had, of course, the Nigeria Communications Commission also, then the Ministry of Information. So you had like 3 or 4 agencies, all jostling for their, and all issuing licenses and quote unquote regulating, singular activities, a singular activity, which was setting up of masts. And what that did, I think, to a large extent, was that it kind of slowed down, or it affected the growth or the integration of access to technology, access to internet services, or even basic communication, GSM communication service. And it's a huge problem till today, although there has been some sort of agreements or arrangements among the regulators. So that's also a problem. We don't want a situation where the regulators will then come together and agree on, okay, yes, we all want to skin this cat, so let's all come up with our own share of the pie and then pass the bill on to the service provider. Because what then happens, considering our revenue generation attitude, the attitude of regulators, what then happens is that cost, the very high revenue cost, it operates as a barrier to entry. And so it discourages companies that can provide these services on a micro level from coming in. And then secondly, those costs are transferred to the customer. So you and I are paying for the regulatory fees that our service providers pay to our regulators, because that cost will always go downstream. And so it's important that we have judicial oversight, and then we have public awareness and sensitization. So those are 2 things that I think will make a huge impact on this issue. I hope I've answered the question satisfactorily.
Yes, sir, you have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Folarin, again for tackling that question. Are there other questions that our mentees want to ask? Are there other questions? Okay. If there are no questions anymore, I think it's time we take our picture so that we can publish on our social media platforms. Please, if you can you turn on your camera or your video rather, so that we can have a picture section. We also like to have mentors, if they can, also join in the picture. So please, sirs, can you help us with that? All right, thank you. I can see a few people's videos are on. Is there any more? Are there more? Please, you can go ahead and turn on your picture. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much, Mr. Lucien. Thank you, Hope. All right, we'll soon be done with that. Okay, thank you very much for that. I think with this, we have come to the end of this class, this section. It was a very, very wonderful section from my own end. I learned quite a lot concerning the legal development of FinTech, and I'm sure going forward, we'll get to learn more about FinTech and how it affects us, both us in the legal aspects of it and other areas. So I want to thank Mr. Lucien and Mr. Folarin for doing due justice to the topic. I also want to thank the mentees for also coming up with that wonderful presentation. We look forward to better work from you guys, better collaboration and cooperation among the mentees. So with that, we've come to the end of today's section. And again, we want to say thank you to our mentors. Thank you for making our time out of your busy schedules to be here. We look forward to having you in the future. Also come and mentor other sections and other streams of mentees. So thank you very much. With that, goodbye and enjoy the rest of your day, everyone.
Thank
Yeah,
you, everyone.
goodbye.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.